Hey, this is Dwan Hill, and you're listening to my podcast, Hey Wise Guys, ideas for creatives about what matters most. Hey, well, welcome back to Hey Wise Guys. This is season 2 of this podcast, and we're jumping in with an interview with one of the wisest men that I know, my dad, my father, the Reverend Dr. Larry Hill, who I call Daddy. He's an amazing man, and I wanted to share my dad and all that he's learned with you. Let me tell you about him really quickly. He started off with a Bachelor of Science degree with the Air Force Academy, was an Air Force pilot, then became a FedEx pilot, and then got a Master's of Arts in Religion and a Master's of Divinity and a Master's of Education and a doctor's degree in ministry. He basically went from being a pilot to a preacher and now a professor, all while being an awesome husband to my mom, a great dad to Marcus and I. So I wanted to know how he did it. How did he deal with challenges, what he thought about creativity, and how he raised a creative like me. So listen in to our Skype chat. This is Ask Dad, Part 1.
Well, hey, Dad. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Dwan. Glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
I just remembered was it for your birthday or for Father's Day that we wrote that Super Daddy song?
That was, I believe, for Father's Day.
Got it. Yeah, Marcus and I, if you guys don't know, are musicians, and we thought it'd be fun to write a song for our dad called Super Daddy, because we really do believe that he has superhuman abilities.
Yeah, right.
He raised us with so much care and love and leadership and faith, and we wrote a song about it. Thankfully, that song is probably not public because I probably would not play it and will not play it for you all. But it was dear to us, and we were glad to do that. So basically, like I said earlier, we're starting a new series today, conversations with people that I look up to and admire and have learned from a lot over the years. And I couldn't think of a better person to start with than my dad. He is currently living in Manassas outside of DC. And so he thankfully made time for us to chat today. Daddy, why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what's going on right now?
Well, my journey started very similar to yours, in fact. I was very much into music. Started off playing saxophone. My mom was able to sacrifice to buy a piano, and my brother and sister and I started piano lessons.
Oh, yeah.
And I ended up in high school with a desire to major in college after graduation. But then I considered the possibilities of doing it for a career, and aviation came on my radar. Some other things transpired. I ended up going to the academy, majoring in engineering, and then embarked on a Air Force aviation career.
Wow.
After that, the Air Force decided that they had better things for me to do other than flying, and I didn't agree with that. So I decided to get out and go fly some more. Got hired with FedEx, flew around the world for many years, enjoyed that. And then life takes funny turns sometimes, and transitions happen. Ended up getting a job. After getting a job with FedEx, I ended up transitioning into the ministry.
Right.
During that time, I ended up graduating from seminary, getting a couple of degrees, going into pastoral ministry for a while, chaplain ministry for a while, transitioning to teaching for a while. Wow. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm actually teaching middle school and teaching at the Northern Virginia Community College as an adjunct assistant professor. Enjoying that as well. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of some people say jack of all trades, but I think you're more than that. I mean, being able to be in music at the start and going and weaving through all those careers. I know a lot of people my age, some people look at that as a positive. Some people look at it as a negative. You know, some people would say that was aimless. Others people would say that was an adventure. Which one do you feel like it was? Do you feel like it was all directed, like your path was laid out for you and it was more like an adventure? Or do you feel like it was a kind of wandering in the wilderness?
Well, my perspective about life is that we have choices. And I think because God gave us freedom to make choices, He also allows us to act on those choices. But then some of those choices end up having to be adjusted along the way, sometimes intentionally, sometimes for reasons that we have no control over. The question is, what do we do with the curves that life presents us when they happen? Yeah. And that's where our faith in God comes in, and how we rely on God's direction in many of those instances. So to answer your question, I think that looking back on it now, some of it was God directed. Mm-hmm. Others were personal choices that I made that I felt that I wanted to make and sometimes needed to make. It's different than my parents. Both of them chose a career and they stayed in it for all their lives.
Yeah.
That's very rare now.
Right.
And so even though it seems like I was wandering, I would say it was intentional on my part, and in a lot of cases were surprising in a way that I didn't expect. And that's how life is sometimes. We just have to rely on God's direction and guidance, especially in times where we aren't sure what the correct or right choices that we need to make for ourselves.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear, because I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast, and myself included, sometimes when the path of the road doesn't turn the way that we thought it was, especially if we applied ourselves for an audition or for a job or asked somebody out on a date or just had a different expectation of how life would turn out. Many times instead of turning right, maybe the road turns left, or maybe we even feel like we go backwards. So how did you navigate, let's say, the transition between the Air Force and FedEx? Because it sounds like something happened in the Air Force that you weren't really excited about, that kind of pushed you maybe even to consider other options. So what is it like to be in a situation that you feel uncomfortable or not turning out the way you think it should, but still move forward?
Yeah, I think that's a very insightful question on your part. Most people, when I give my resume and bio, they skip past that and don't even think about asking what happened there. But, and I've told you this before, my philosophy is that sometimes, people always talk about finding the open door and new opportunities. Mm-hmm. I believe, especially in this particular case, that God sometimes closes doors to provide us a new opportunity that we didn't even know that was there.
I agree.
So in this particular case, I had my eyes set on retirement as a pilot for FedEx. I was just getting ready to go to, we call it Captain's Upgrade School, where you go from a first officer to a captain. And once you become a captain, that's the height of your aviation career. You retire at that place. You can't get promoted anymore. So I was all set. And then I had to take a medical examination by an FAA doctor, which is very stringent, by the way. And I didn't pass. And if you don't pass your FAA medical examination, then you lose your ability to fly again, because that's a requirement. Wow. Once I lost my medical certificate, that threw me for a big loop, because all those hopes and dreams that I had of being a captain and finishing out my career at FedEx seemed to be disappearing. So after a while, and I really came to grips with the fact that I couldn't fly anymore, it was hard. It was hard. It was because I hadn't even thought of a different opportunity, a different career.
Wow.
Even though I had already pretty much started, and I think I had finished by that time, seminary. I believe that opportunity, that closed door was an opportunity for me to embark on a whole absolutely different path of my life.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up in full-time ministry.
Man, I have so many questions. How old was Marcus and I during that time?
This was in 2001. So you can back that up to whatever age you were at that time. That was 19 years ago. Let's say almost 20 years ago.
Wow. So we were teenagers.
Right.
Most people know that I'm a dad. I have a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. And I'm walking through some of those same challenges of trying to figure out what exactly a career in music or a career in creativity or now a career in ministry looks like. And I see myself in your story a lot, which is great. It's encouraging to hear. What was it like as a father? Because I heard you describe basically your internal dreams being shifted, but what was it like exploring or dealing with that at the same time that you obviously felt a need and a responsibility to take care of your family? Did you have any quick decisions you had to make? Did you have time to transition? What was that like?
I didn't realize it at the time, and obviously I couldn't, there was no way of me knowing that this was coming or it was going to happen. But reflecting back on it, now that I see that because I had done certain things and made certain choices before this, God was already preparing me for what was to come, and I didn't even know it. Because had I not started seminary years back, I would have been, my aviation career would have ended with me having nothing to fall back on.
So you started seminary before the health check. Okay.
Oh yeah, it was a busy time, and I think it was a sacrifice for me and the family because I was working at FedEx, I was going to school full time, and I was taking care of a wife and 2 small children all at the same time. There were times where I had no idea what day it was.
Wow.
And I knew it was a sacrifice. I wasn't able to be around all the time, but I think that sacrifice paid off because by the time I ended my aviation career, it allowed me to be there for you all a lot more in terms of time.
Yeah.
Because the things that I was doing, you all were doing it with me as well, especially in the church.
Well, so what prompted the seminary? Because you started seminary before you found out that flying might not be the end of the career. Right. So I think that's a good thing to explore. What prompted you to even start something before you knew that it would be something you would lean on later?
I think God speaks to us, I think probably in different ways.
Yeah.
I just felt, some people call it a calling. I think part of it was a desire on my part too, even though this particular career I was in was more technical oriented. I always had this urge, this sense of desire to do more in terms of helping people, to develop a way to make a difference in people's lives that I wasn't able to do as a pilot.
Yeah.
So part of that was my, that's how I ended up going to seminary. And part of that is because I knew that my upbringing and my faith was rooted in church, and I knew that was a good place to start. I didn't know where it would end up, but I knew it was a good place to start. So that's how it started, and I ended. I think for people that are creative, there's always a desire, a curiosity. There's always this something in us that wants to explore more, do more, know more. And part of that was the reason I went to seminary, because I wanted to know more. I was curious about things that when I asked questions, I couldn't get the answer for. And I wanted to be in an environment where I was around people who also had that longing and thirst for more knowledge. And that's why I went. And that was a very enlightening and fulfilling environment to be in. And I've lived by this mantra. You learn to love, but you also love to learn.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting connection you just made there between creativity and going to seminary. I know we've talked before about what creativity is and what defines a creative person. And I think there's a strong bridge between being creative and being a creative person and being interested in a calling, for example. I think a lot of my life, I've separated those two things. I'm either a creative person, I do artistic things, or I'm a minister, or I'm going to seminary, or I'm a fireman. And I think maybe we can talk about the connection. Maybe there's a bridge we can make there between creativity and calling. What do you think about that? Do you think there's a way those two things can be combined?
Well, here's what I think the connection is. I believe, and this is a theological perspective about this.
Yes. Sure.
In Genesis, the book of creation, it talks about that in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So the creator was not just there at the beginning, but was the beginning. And then the creator created us.
Right.
Not only created us, but created us in God's image. So now, if we believe that, that means that the creator in us, there is some of the creator in us, which means that innately we all have creativity.
Awesome.
Because the creator, if we're created in God's image, there's that aspect of God is in us.
Yeah, that's great.
So here's the last part of to your question, that because we are created in God's image, we all, whether we acknowledge it or even realize it or are aware of it, have this longing to be connected in an intimate way with the creator.
Yeah.
So there's a calling in us for the creator anyway.
Right.
So the calling that you are talking about is a calling to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a specific thing like ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that because of the connection I just explained, that we all are called to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And what that something is different for all of us, I believe.
Right. It's almost like we're called first to God. It's that the creativity in us is almost like deep calls to deep. We have a longing to experience something beyond us, which is God. But we also have a longing to use our hands and our minds and our intellect and our faith to mimic what God is doing. It's almost like you and I. You know, you're my father. I have a longing to be with you and a longing to know you from an intimate place. But I also do a lot of the same things. Our lives are a lot similar. And I think that's what happens as children of God. We long for him, but we also start to do things like him. And I think that connection is really, that connection you just made is really great, because it helps me not to compartmentalize my life to today I'm being creative and then tomorrow I'm going to live in my calling. Or
creativity in that sense is not just something that we do. We do things because we are creative, but the creativeness in us is it makes us who we are. So that's why it manifests itself in different ways in different people.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the arts. It's not just about music or drama or poetry. It's not, I mean, it's part of it, but it manifests itself in all aspects of our lives. It's how we think, right?
Yeah. Now, I thought about this morning when I was preparing to talk to you. What do you think about this? I wondered if creativity was really problem solving. Because if you zoom out from, I like what you just said. You said that creativity is not limited to the arts, like drama, music, writing, poetry, which I think is great. So I guess my question is, can an administrator be creative? Can a fireman be creative? And to me, the link may be problem solving, like the ability to look at a situation and come up with a fresh, new perspective to address that. What do you think about that?
Okay, so there's two aspects of this, I think. One aspect is there are people, getting back to what I just said, there's creativeness in all of us. And some of us that support that, enhance that, develop that. And some of us realize that in us, and we work to enhance it in whatever way we can.
Yeah.
There are others who may not be aware of it, or they choose not to act on it. So in terms of problem solving, the creativity in us, I think you mentioned this, it's not that I think anybody can solve a problem. The question is how we solve it.
Right.
People who are creative look at problems with a different perspective.
Right.
They don't come to a problem with a solution already at hand and then work around that solution. People that are more creative come at the problem solving with many different possibilities and then try to figure out out of those many possibilities, which is the best one.
Right.
In education, we call that divergent thinking. And here's how it manifests itself in adults, because there's a study that they took kindergarten children and asked them one question: how many uses can you come up with for a paperclip? And they scored 98% of the kindergartners scored on a genius level when it came to this type of divergent thinking, because they came up with so many different ways. The older they got, though, middle school, high school, and beyond, the less creative solutions they came up with.
Wow.
And so by the time they became adults, that creativity, for whatever reason, and there are reasons that researchers think that this happens, that creativity diminishes. So people that are good problem solvers find ways of allowing that creativity to help their thinking in ways that they look at problems in different ways than people that don't.
Wow.
And what that means in terms of, I mean, that concept taken into areas like ministry and church and even other areas of our lives can make a difference in how we look at our own life and our own life journey, how we interact with our families,
right,
and those around us. It's not different because people with creativity are different. It's different because some people look at things differently.
Yeah, and that makes me think and be really grateful for you all, my parents, because I know and remember you all fostering that spirit in us from a very young age, whether it was investing in music lessons, or I remember driving home from church almost every week and you or mommy would ask, what did you all think of the sermon? Or if you didn't ask us, you all would be talking about it. And I know that fostered what some people might say is questioning, but I look at as just asking questions, a curiosity, an exploration of ideas. You know, if someone read a scripture that Sunday and had a viewpoint or perspective about it, we had the option and opportunity to think about it. And in a safe environment, obviously we weren't, you know, heretics driving home from church, but
right.
we were thinkers. We were creative people thinking about it. So I appreciate you all fostering that. And what are some other ways? Because I'm curious. I know that I wasn't the easiest person to raise as, because I think if on the creative pendulum of things, you know, I'm sure there are areas that I grew up and kind of bucked systems and thought outside the box and did things that were different than maybe other children would do. But what was it like raising, obviously, someone who leaned toward expressive thinking than maybe a common rule follower?
Never a dull moment. It was always interesting. But that's okay. The one thing that I would encourage people to do is not to be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
And if you're in an environment, here's the thing, and school and education does this in ways that stifle creativity in a lot of ways. Because when people ask questions, the tendency is to give them answers.
Mm-hmm.
What we try to do as parents with you all, when you ask questions, one of the first things I would say is, what do you think? Because my goal was to help you. And sometimes you may have to struggle with your own questions, but that's part of learning. That's part of discovering. That's part of thinking about things in different ways. And there was sometimes, we needed to guide you and, with answers that will help you, but it wasn't always giving you the answer for every question.
Mm-hmm.
I heard this, I don't know where it came from, but I remember it, that it's better to struggle with your own questions than live with someone else's answers.
Wow.
And people who are creative, they struggle a lot with questions.
It's almost like they're open to the struggle, maybe more than other people.
They're open to the struggle because when they find the answer is much more fulfilling than someone giving them the answer. And that answer is someone else's answers, not yours.
Right.
And here's the thing, someone else's answers may be completely different than the answer that you would come up with.
Right.
And people that are creative, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay if you, and the question you asked me before, what was it like? I was okay with your answers being different.
Mm-hmm.
Your choices being different. And I remember one good example when you were in college trying to figure out what to major in and things. And I said, well, what about education? You get benefits, you get a solid job, get the summers off and everything. I said, what do you think about that? Nah, I got this music thing going. I'd rather do that. And so my thoughts about that were different than yours, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And when people are we tried to be okay with you being okay with ended up in a different place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could think of so many examples of how that was beneficial to Marcus and I. And even in my life today, this podcast is called Hey Wise Guys. And I think wisdom is something that's really been important to me most of my life. And I didn't really know that, but I've recently been putting language to why wisdom means so much to me, because wisdom is, I guess in a short definition, is how we make decisions. It's not just having information, but it's having information and being able to sort through it and make a wise decision from that. And I think as a creative person, it's so funny because sometimes I'll arrive at the same answer that someone told me, but because of my bent,
right,
it's like I like to go through the process and get there.
And that process to get there was probably different than somebody else's process to get there.
Right.
I'll give you a good example of, you talk about wisdom. One of the things, you probably don't remember this, but you were probably about 3 or 4 years old, and we were sitting in the car waiting for, I guess your mother was in the store doing something. And you, out of the blue, you asked this question, Daddy, do people wear clothes in heaven?
No, I don't remember that at all.
And I was, I said, I was thinking to myself, where did that question? I have no idea where it came from. But, those are the kind of questions you were tending to ask. And you would not let me off the hook until I gave you an answer you were satisfied with. So it was hard because I couldn't talk about immortality to a 4-year-old. Right. I mean, I had to explain it. I said, well, my first answer was, well, Dwan, we don't need clothes in heaven. But why, Daddy? Everybody else wear clothes. So it's this longing for knowledge, even at an early age, that you always had. I think people that are wise have to start with seeking knowledge first, because it's hard to be wise and not knowing anything.
Right.
So I would say that's why I say don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't know if I ever gave you an answer that you were satisfied with, but because you asked the question, I knew that you from an early age were curious about everything. Mm-hmm. And that told me a lot about how you were going to end up in terms of thinking about things differently than other people.
Wow. Wasn't that incredible? You just got a sneak peek, or really kind of a look back into what my childhood was like. My dad has been talking like that since the beginning of my life. And you know what? I know some of you may not have had the same opportunity to grow up with a father in your home. And I'm sorry about that. It breaks my heart. You know what? I want to share my dad with you. I think this is going to be a continual thing that I'm going to do. We have a part 2 next time. I think it's important for us to hear from fathers, and fathers who love their children and love their wives and love Jesus and are committed to doing everything they were created to do. So next week, in part 2 of this interview, my dad's going to share how he dealt with the fear of failure and the fear of taking risk. And he'll also share how faith got him through someone telling him he would never be smart enough to get into the Air Force Academy. It's going to be great. I'll see you next time.